Alex here with a legal nuts and bolts video on punitive damages. So in my previous video I covered compensatory damages, which were awarded to make a person whole again. If you want to go into the details as to what compensatory damages are, you should probably watch my previous video. Going straight into punitive damages, those are not awarded to make a person whole again. Those are awarded to punish and deter a defendant from doing something ever again. And not just that defendant, but the court actually makes an example of the defendant and is also hoping that other people who have seen what has happened to that defendant are deterred from doing whatever that defendant did. So going straight into it, you can't claim that you have any right to punitive damages. In fact, there's case law in Nevada that specifically says that you don't have a right to punitive damages because they're not awarded at all based on what has happened to you. They're awarded based on punishing and stopping the defendant from doing what they're doing. And I'm going to go into why this matters, because the amount of damages that are computed are based on the net worth of the defendant. For that specific reason, because the court is not focused on making you whole again when it awards punitive damages. It's focused on stopping the defendant from doing it again, and therefore it's focused on awarding an amount of monetary damages that are enough that the defendant will feel the pinch, or they'll feel the hit. And I think actually that covers the amount of damages well enough. What I also wanted to cover in this video was the three different types of things that you have to prove, at least in Nevada, if you want to get an award of punitive damages, or in other words, if they're even applicable. So the first thing is oppression, the second thing is malice, and the third thing is fraud. And as I mentioned, this is for Nevada. There may be other states that have different standards under which you can get punitive damages, but in Nevada it's one of those three things. I'm not going to do videos on what those three things are, any separate videos. I'll just cover them briefly right now. Malice is conduct which is above and beyond. Just to speak in general terms, you're showing that you weren't just harmed on accident. The person did it intentionally, in a cruel way. With that, I'm just going to stop right there. If you want to look into the definition of malice in your own state, you can go ahead and do that. In Nevada, we have case law that defines malice specifically. But typically, what people usually do is they show that a company, for example, a company did something wrong, was told to stop doing it, and they continued to do it, or that a person did some kind of harm to somebody, like they tortured them or did something on purpose to be cruel, things like that. Oppression is a curious thing. For oppression, you have to show that a superior person, like somebody in a superior position, has exploited their position to commit some kind of wrong on an inferior, weaker person. And what I see is it usually comes to something like an employer doing something to an employee where they're exploiting the fact that they that they need their job. So they're abusing an employee in some way that the employee wouldn't ordinarily allow some other person to do to them, but because it's their boss and they need a paycheck, they're allowing it. Another example might be like a landlord-tenant situation where they're violating somebody's rights that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to violate, but because the person needs a place to live, they allow it. It's curious how it works. There's probably a lot of case law in your state that defines examples of oppression. You should look into that if you want to look into getting an award of punitive damages. The third thing is fraud. Fraud, by its very nature, is insidious. It's tricky. It's not everyone's going to notice they've been defrauded. So oftentimes there's a profit motive attached to it. So, for example, and actually there could be a profit motive attached to oppression also, but I'll just use fraud. For example, if you defraud 100 people and only one of them figures it out, and that one person sues you and you only have to pay that one person back, there's no reason for you to stop because you've ripped off the other 99 people. So it's actually built into the crime or the fraud or that's what I'm saying. It's built into it to just continue doing what you're doing because you're only going to have to pay back the people who've caught you. So with punitive damages award, that obviously erases a profit motive because, as I mentioned previously in the video, when the court awards punitive damages, it's awarding an amount of damages based on your net worth. So, I mean, whatever award whatever fraud is being committed, when you face with a punitive damages award of like 4 or 5% of your net worth, your assets, it's gonna stop you from doing it anymore. There are some problems with these principles now because of the McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. A lot of states have implemented caps on various different types of damages, and your punitive damage award may be capped. I know in Nevada that if the compensatory damage award is less than $100,000, you can only collect up to $300,000 in punitive damages awards, and if not, then you can only collect. I think it was something like 3 times the amount of damages that you were awarded, and that really can actually get in the way of what punitive damages was originally meant for. By the way, the whole hot coffee situation was not really what people thought it was. There's a Netflix video on it. I recommend anyone here watch it just to see how much the public was deceived by McDonald's and their lobbies as to how, oh my God, we needed to put a stop to punitive damages, that there were these evil lawyers ripping people off. It's actually not what you think it was. The woman who was awarded punitive damages absolutely deserved it once you find out the details as to what McDonald's was doing. But anyway, that basically does get in the way of it now, because if a company commits some kind of harm for like $1 million and they only have to pay $4 million, that may sound like a lot to you, but if it's Coca-Cola doing it, that's nothing to them. So it really is disappointing that a lot of the tort reform stuff was passed, and I hope to see that it gets repealed in the future. Luckily in Nevada, there are still certain areas where the caps do not apply. One of them is like insurance bad faith claims, which is really good that those guys aren't capped, because they could do so much harm. I'm not going to go into that right now, into what insurance bad faith is, but if you are curious about it, you can look into what it is and why it's really good that insurance companies are not capped from punitive damage awards. The sky's the limit on those guys, and it's really important that stays the way it is. At least I feel it's important. So with that, I think I'm gonna, there's a couple other things I'll cover. You can only collect punitive damages in tort causes of action. You can't do it with a breach of contract. Not sure why. There may be a lawyer who, if they feel like going ahead and posting it in the comments below, explaining it. But I do know that I've seen in the case law that I've looked at, because I actually did sue a landlord for punitive damages, that you can only do it if you can show that a tort was committed. You cannot do it if it's a breach of contract. And the other thing I was going to mention with regards to punitive damages was you have to show that the fraud, the oppression, or the malice was, you have to prove it by clear and convincing evidence. It's not enough to prove it by preponderance of the evidence. And I have a separate video on clear and convincing evidence, so if you'd like to look into what that is, you can go ahead and watch that video. With that, hopefully I've given people enough terms, topics, breadcrumbs, and all that to look into their own states' case laws, statutes, rules, and determine if they feel that a punitive damage award is going to work out in their case. These are really tough videos for me to do, because I feel like if I go too far, people are just going to think everything that I've said in the video is everything that needs to be listened to, and it really isn't. I'm just giving people the terms and the basic abstract principles, the overarching ideas. It's important that you look into the nooks and crannies of how it works in your own state, because you never really know what particulars, and even in Nevada I haven't covered the nooks and crannies. So I really just wanted people to know what punitive damages were and some of the terms that they may have to look into. So with that, I'll go ahead and end this video.